Happy Friday. It is Sexy First Friday, which means that you get to see Sam and I today. I am just waiting for Sam to hop on for us to get started. But today is episode 2 in our relationship basics, and we are going to talk all things nonviolent communication style, really essential style to have the kind of communication we want to have in relationships. And Sam and I are looking forward to talking a little bit about how you can use this style in relationship with people in your lives. It's something that I use every single day in my therapy practice, and I know Sam uses in her coaching practice. It looks like Sam is here. Let's fingers crossed everything works well today, and I'm going to let her in. Every once in a while we have a glitch. That's why we always start on earlier, but there she is. It worked today. Hi, Sam. Good
Hi,
to see you again.
happy February.
Happy February, everybody. I can't believe it's already February, to be honest. It's kind of amazing that we already are into the second month of 2026. Well, welcome. Today we start off with our relationship series basics episode 2. If you missed last month, we did episode 1 on the relationship cycle. Go back and feel free to watch that one if you want to understand that one a little bit more in depth, the cycles that relationships go through. Also, always on our YouTube page, if you want to go over there and see those videos. It's always easier to find things over there than it can be sometimes on Instagram. But today it's all about the nonviolent communication style. And I know this is something that I use with honestly every client, even my individuals coming in. We use this style in the practice as well. How about you, Sam? Is it something you use every day as well?
Absolutely. I'd say I typically I work with couples, although I also sometimes work with individuals, and I use it with every single couple, some more, some less. Sometimes we do it in session. Sometimes I just advise them to do it outside of session. But it's one of the most frequently used tools, I'd say, in my coaching practice.
It's such an essential one. And let's talk a little bit about exactly what it is. So it's a method and process of communicating with intention and help in de-escalating on conflict. And it involves kind of what I call 4 key steps or components that you're going to want to use. So the first step or first component is observation of behaviors and actions that are affecting your well-being. So when someone is interacting or relating, and we'll go a little bit more into this about what this looks like, but we're looking at one of the things that I always say in therapy is we don't want to attack our partner intrinsically. We want to focus on the behaviors and actions that they're doing or the observations of the things that they're doing that affect our well-being. And then step 2, or the second part of this, is really looking at the feelings that you're having in that moment. I think one thing that can happen with feelings is that you can oftentimes too, like, what is a feeling, right? And understanding what those feelings are. What's wonderful with this method, and if people want that information, there is some really nice clear-cut handouts that talk about what emotions are and when you're feeling them. We won't go into depth today on what that is, but just understand that feelings is the next one. The next one is the need that you have in that moment when that behavior action is affecting your well-being. And then it becomes the request that you have that is happening in that moment. So those are really those 4 steps that you're going to use when you're using this style. And it's all about listening and staying centered and understanding the other person's perspective. Anything you would add there, Sam?
No, that's perfect. Before I'm going to just talk a little bit about kind of the history of nonviolent communication, but I realized we forgot to introduce ourselves. So if anyone, I know most people know us, but if anyone is new, we'll just say who we are real quick. So I'm Dr. Sam E. Greenberg. I am a sexuality researcher and a Enneagram coach specializing in sexuality, intimacy, and relationships. We often forget to say our type as well. So I am type 5 and my subtype is sexual.
Thanks for that reminder, Sam. I feel like we do this so often. Like, everybody knows who we are. No, not everybody knows who we are. My name is Lyndsey Frazier. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist who has a private practice in South Minneapolis, where I specialize in relationships and sexuality utilizing the Enneagram. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, and my Enneagram type, I am an Enneagram type 9, and my dominant instinct is social.
So, also, if you're new here, we typically talk about all things Enneagram and sex and sexuality. That's our specialty, but we are doing a little bit of a diversion from that just for 3 cycles of Sexy First Friday. Here, we're talking about relationship basics. We also have covered sexuality basics in our last cycle of 3, and then we'll be covering Enneagram basics. So, we're kind of bringing some of our general knowledge to the world, although you can still find our Enneagram and sexuality content on our websites, on our Instagrams, etc. We are still doing that as well. Okay, so diving back into nonviolent communication, just how it developed. So it was developed by Marshall Rosenberg in the 1960s. And I actually just learned doing research for this episode that he developed it while doing work in schools to heal racial tension, actually. That was associated with school integration, which is a big thing that was happening at the time. So, although nonviolent communication is very commonly used today with couples and couples therapy, it actually has its roots in community and racial healing. So, I think that was super cool. And it can be used for absolutely any type of conflict. So, from spouses, but to parents and children, community members, like friendships, anything. And in fact, a version of the same principles are often actually used in diplomatic discussions between countries. So I think it's not called this, but very similar principles are used in diplomatic relations between countries as well. So I thought that's cool to know as well. So before we get into sort of how we use this in our work and a little bit on how it relates to the Enneagram, I just going to explain it, how it works in case you haven't encountered it before. So, as Lyndsey said, it has the 4 components: observations, feelings, needs, and requests. Some of the key important things to know is that it's all about owning your reactions, your feelings, your narrative as belonging to yourself. So, what we often do as a mistake in conflict, and I think Lyndsey will talk a little bit more about mistakes that people do in conflict, is that we attribute motivation to the other person. We attribute their inner world to them, their value structure. Like we say, well, you treated me this way because you don't care about me. Well, we have no idea, in fact, if they care about us or not. So that would be considered like violent communication because it's crossing the boundaries of that other person and telling them how they feel, right? So the way nonviolent communication style works is that if you were the expressing person, the sending or expressing person, you would first express how you feel, but owning your feelings and reactions, like I said. So you would have the observation, like, for example, we were meant to meet at this time for the movie, and when you showed up 15 minutes late, I felt, and then you're going to say the feelings. All feeling words. This is where people get tripped up a lot in my coaching. They'll say, I felt like you hate me. It's like, that's not a feeling. I felt what? Dismissed, overlooked, unimportant. Go into yourself and you express the feelings. You want to keep your communication always to emotions. You can say body sensations if you want. I felt really hot. I felt agitated. And thoughts, if you're going to get into thoughts, you have to own it as your own narrative and your own story. So the story in my head is, when that happened, the story in my head was that you don't care about me. But you can't say you don't care about me, right? Because again, that's probably not true and you don't know. The partner who is listening, or the person who is listening, is saying, going to mirror back what you have said and shared. So they're going to repeat it back to you. And then your job is just say, yes, that's correct, or no, that's not quite it, and then to make corrections and additions. And then it's your partner's job. I'll talk about the listening partner in a second. Then it'd be your partner's job to kind of validate or empathize. And you're going to then let them know the need and make a request. For the listening partner, your job is going to be to mirror back the feelings. After the person who's talking says that you're correct in your mirroring, it's to validate, even if you don't agree. I can see why you would feel that way. If I put myself in your shoes, that makes sense. I get it. Then when they express a need, to hear them, and when they make a request, your job is to say yes or no. Is that yes, that's something I can do, or no, that's not something I can do. So it's a little bit tricky to explain without showing you. So we'll probably give an example here in a minute. But Lyndsey, can you just tell me if I'm missing anything?
No, I think that you are describing that really well. I think sometimes too, like you said with the feelings, like really understanding what is a feeling word, and sort of that ability to be. And I think the things that sometimes I realize with clients too is sometimes like this can go either way. Also, when your partner has done something really lovely, right, and you feel excited or joy or happiness, and I think sometimes we forget that it can be used for complaints, but it can also be used in a way to show your partner when they're doing things well. I think I find with the feelings part a lot too is that sometimes people don't recognize maybe lower grade feelings like boredom are actually an indication of an unmet need. And also just like what a need is. I think we could go into a whole episode just around what needs are. But again, I think what I love about his books and his things that he has is that they actually give you a really nice list of what needs are. Basic needs, like even like I was hungry and we didn't stop for food. Like I see this a lot with my first time parents when they have a baby, right? And they're like, I'm starving. And when you don't help me, what, like, and you don't help me, I was really frustrated when you didn't take the baby because I was tired or I was hungry and I really needed to eat. My request is could you help me out with the baby so I could get some food, right? Like just really simple things like that I think sometimes people don't realize are needs that you can ask for as well. And I think sometimes with the request too, you can't be like, I request that you no longer be a jerk, for instance. It's like you have to have valid behaviors and actions that you want the person to change. Like in the one that you said, if you're going to be late in the future, could you please just text me and let me know that you're running late? Or could you, try to leave 15 minutes early so that you can be on time when we are going to be meeting. I mean, like these are the requests that you can make, right? And also giving I always say the story I tell myself, which is exactly what you're saying too. Interesting. I got that from a therapist that I saw like many, many years ago, and I absolutely loved it. And the story I'm telling myself is that you don't love me anymore. And I think it just, that ownership, right? Like now I'm responsible for this. And sometimes the person's like, yeah, I don't love you anymore. You're an asshole, whatever, But sometimes it's like, no, wow, like I had no idea. I would never want you to feel that way, right? But that it gives that person that permission to like verify whether that story is true or not. Gosh, I just realized I used some swear words today, so hope people are okay with that too.
I typically do use them, so yeah, hopefully people can kind of take or leave us. I don't think we're able to self-edit anymore. Um, So I actually wonder if, Lyndsey, we can model this one time through so that people kind of get a sense of it before we talk a little bit more. I want to talk about, what trips people up and things like that. But I think it's really hard to grasp this just as a concept. So if we can just model an interaction between ourselves using this framework, and so people can get a sense of it, would that be okay, Lyndsey?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna, if it's okay, I'm gonna be the sharing partner, and then you can be the receiving. So, Lyndsey, when I saw you met with our other colleague without me, I felt hurt and left out.
So what I'm hearing, Sam, is that when I met with our colleague without you, that you were feeling hurt and left out. Did I get that right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. And I appreciate you listening. I have a need to feel included, even if I'm not actually included in the meeting. So would you be willing to let me know in advance next time if you're planning to meet with someone we both have a relationship with, even if it's without me?
So what I'm hearing is that you have a need to be included, even if you're not included. And so that your request is that if I plan a meeting with one of our colleagues, that I at least let you know first ahead of time. Did I get that right or did I miss anything?
No, that's exactly right. Is that something you feel like you could do?
Oh, definitely. I would never want you to feel as if you were not included. You're really important to me, and I always want you to feel included in what we do. And so I can definitely let you know in the future if I'm planning a meeting with a colleague without you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, great. That's much more smooth and fast than it normally would go. I just want to kind of caution people, but that's the idea. So, like, I share something, Lyndsey just didn't say anything. Like, what do you mean? I didn't leave you out. and even though that's probably her experience, if you were doing this in a therapy setting, we would probably then switch and have Lyndsey say, when I planned that meeting without you, and then her kind of experience. But I don't think we need to do that for our purposes here. So what tends to come up that's difficult is people going too fast so that they use like incendiary language, inflammatory language, like maybe they're more used to doing, and they don't slow down enough to own their feelings and narrative. I'd say that's the biggest thing I see that trips people up is they just like kind of plow forward really fast because emotions are hot oftentimes, when we're using this, and they'll say things like, they'll start off strong, when you forgot to do the dishes when you promised you would. I just felt like you don't ever do anything. It goes off the rails really fast. So, a really big key for this is to slow down. Like more breath, like deep breaths before you start, breathing throughout, and just slow, especially for our assertive Enneagram types, we'll get to in a minute, slow your communication way down. What else would you say kind of trips people up, Lyndsey, when they're first learning this?
I think what happens for people when they're first learning this is, one of the things we talk about is that our brain is kind of like cycles and systems of relating. And so our brain kind of wants to do the typical response that we typically give. So like, really common one is if you're critical, the other person might respond defensiveness, and you're going to have a series of these sorts of things that happen. And so when I ask people kind of even in session or in between sessions to practice this, it feels really cumbersome to them, and it feels kind of like a lot to do. But what I always tell people is it starts off that way, and then as you're establishing that new relational cycle or system, you will come into your own with it, and it will be more natural. So giving yourself that space to be like, it's going to feel cumbersome, I'm going to trip it up, I'm not going to do it quite right the first time, I'm going to be like, oh, why did Lyndsey or Sam give me this assignment? But what I find is that you quickly then find your own like rhythm with it and your own language with it, and you will feel so much better in your relationship when you use it.
I love that, and you're absolutely right. I will say that for some, especially people who are more used to, who are maybe a little more hot-tempered or used to kind of yelling, I sometimes pair this with another exercise that is definitely not for everyone, but I sometimes pair it with an exercise where you can set a timer for 1 minute each and just like yell and scream, if with your partner's permission, obviously, and kind of like get it out first. Ideally, you can get it out on your own, but sometimes, like, depending on the dynamics of the couple, sometimes they really need to get it out kind of like with the person as a witness. And that's a different topic for a different episode. But just know that this is a skill set you can sometimes pair with other activities, exercises, and skill sets if just this one alone isn't quite working for you. Um, should we talk a little bit about how we use this in our work? I know we've already touched on that.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit that I wanted, which will also kind of move into this, is that really when you're working on communication skills and things like that, there's actually multiple steps of things that need to come into play. So this is just one step of the steps that I do. So I do communication stoppers and triggers, creating that list. We also talk about emotional escalation and when you move into reptilian brain. And so the reason I want to say that is like this is one step in many, but it's also a tool you can use like immediately. So like being generous with yourselves in the sense of like, if we were actually going to do communication work, you probably are going to get about 4 or 5 other steps from me with this as being part of it too. And so I think that that's one of the things to kind of keep in mind as well is that, and I think one of the things I note in practice too is like communication doesn't fix the issues that you are coming into therapy or coaching for. What it does and how we use it in the practice is to give you skills to regulate you enough to actually have the capacity to have the conversations around the things that are causing you pain.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. I find that if people can get the hang of this and do it truly, it does untangle the kind of knots around the issues, while again, not necessarily fixing the issue, but allowing you to get to the solutions. One of the things I think is important to mention is that you have to manage your tone. You know, you can't be mirroring and validating sarcastically or anything like that. So when I say about getting the hang of it, it's like you practice and practice and practice until you've slowed down your communication enough that you're really doing all the steps and that you're doing them genuinely. Then it does, like Lyndsey said, untangle them. Like the knot of communication doesn't solve the problem, but it really helps you get set up to solve it. Would you say that's true?
Exactly. I think that's like you know, 100%. I think sometimes couples come in and they think, well, if I get the right communication skills, then we'll be repaired. And it's like, I wish I could tell you that that would repair what's happening or occurring. But also with these cycles and systems, like many times people have been doing these cycles and systems that don't work well for a really long time, and a lot of pain and hurt and things that do need to be untangled are there. So don't be hard on yourselves if you're like, hey, we've got better communication skills, and now we're like, oh my goodness, there is a mountain of things that we still need repair on. But what I do see is once you have this tool, we start to make progress significantly more quickly in the repair of those, like what I like to call wounding or pain points or whatever analogies you want to use. I love the wounding analogy because it's kind of like, you know, wounds scab over and you can reopen them. And that's one of the ones I learned in graduate school. I think most therapists here. But it's just that, you know, you're going to open up some wounds and they're going to be healed over a little bit with this. This might create a little bit more of a scab, but it's not like actually repaired.
Hmm. That's all. Those are all great points as well. So, in terms of how, like, I personally use this in my work, I oftentimes will have couples do this in a session with me helping and kind of coaching them through it. Because if you just learn this and you sit down to do it, oftentimes, like I said, the first several times going to spin off into your old patterns. So if couples are going through it in session and right when they get to, they stop using feeling words or they start using attributing motivation to their partner, you know, instead of being curious and those types of things, I'll just be like, okay, let's stop, kind of back it up, start over. So actually coaching on this itself is something that I do. And then, you know, when people are really locked up with an issue, even people who already know how to do this, but they're locked up with an issue that's really triggering for both of them, we'll sometimes just bring it down to doing this so that they can slow their communication for that particular issue that's such like a hot button issue for them. Do you want to add anything about how you use it?
In a very similar way. And sometimes if people don't know quite how to do it yet themselves, like I will actually take one of the issues or concerns that they are bringing in and model a way to do that and then confirm to them, whoever the one that's bringing the complaint up, like, is that accurate? Did I miss anything? Can you, now you've heard me, can you now repeat what I said? And so I do a little bit of that as well. And I will stop people in session where I'm like, oh, not a feeling word. I feel like you're an asshole. I feel like you're a jerk. Not a feeling word. Can we step back? What is the feeling? You know, and so I think, or I feel you're jealous. No, you would say I'm feeling jealous if that is the case, right? Or the story I'm telling myself is you're jealous right now, and I'm not sure about that. So I'll stop people, you know. It's interesting being a 9, like I'm actually pretty directive in therapy. You know, it's like it's easier to do my therapy practice than it is in my day-to-day life sometimes, but I will stop people and correct them, sort of like, that's not a feeling word, let's go back, that's not a valid request, here's how we can do that differently. And kind of slowing them down, like when we're actually doing the process. But for some people, they do need me to model it for them like a handful of times before they have the capacity to do it.
I also want to say, I'm just realizing how long this episode could be, but before we quickly move into a little bit of Enneagram stuff, when people are triggered into their inner child, into their childish parts, this becomes essentially impossible. If you imagine sitting like a 6-year-old down who was like hitting their sister, and you're like, no, you need to say, when you took my toy, you know, they can't do it. You know, maybe children can once they're calm, but basically, I've noticed when people are triggered into their child parts, they can't do this. So when that happens, like we pause and take care of those parts first. Hold space for them. What do they need? What are they feeling? Like give them what they didn't have maybe when you were growing up before we would then move forward into this because this is an adult, mature way of communicating.
Yeah, it's the functioning adult, right? And so if we're an adaptive child or adaptive teen, it's not going to work.
Exactly. Um, So this isn't an Enneagram episode, but I want to touch on the Enneagrams. The Enneagram has to do with, we can find relationships between the Enneagram and everything. So I found that in my work, assertive types, especially sevens and eights, looking at you, sevens and eights, they are the ones who struggle most with this. Because or struggle at most with a certain part of this, which is to slow down and break it into component parts, break their experience into the component parts of feelings, need, request, observation. They just want like as fast as possible say what their experience is, and because they're so fast and intense as types, they really get frustrated by the fact that they have to slow down. And what's great about this is if they're partnered with our withdrawn types, or really any types that's not as assertive as them, this helps equalize the playing field of, how much space everyone's taking up. So if you're 7 or 8 doing this and you find yourself really frustrated by having to bring yourself down, it is probably because you're used to taking up more space. And this is asking you to take up the same amount as your partner. But then conversely, we get our withdrawn types, our attachment types, especially sixes and nines, our withdrawn types, especially fives and nines, who are more prone to struggling with the sharing steps of this. So it comes to their turn and they're like, either I'm fine, or when you did that, I didn't like it. But they're not like digging into the vulnerability and bringing it out of themselves. And that's sort of like a version more of in the stonewalling arena, of shutting down the interaction. So those are two things I've noticed. What about you, Lyndsey?
Well, I was just going to say, even just with what you're saying there, I think if we go to sort of like what each of these types do when they're in emotional escalation, right? So when they've crossed that threshold, and we call it like instinctual brain or reptilian brain, your assertive types are fighters, right? And your attachment types or withdrawal types tend to be more fawners or freezers or fleers, depending. And so you're going to see some of that type of behavior happen. And a lot of that, which we won't, again, we could do like a whole like series of many episodes on this, is helping people get regulated in the actual body, which is also another really essential piece of this, is understanding sort of how Enneagram types show up in that. But like sometimes in this sense too, it's like, I'm a 9, I'm going to sometimes be like, I don't feel like answering you, and be passive aggressive, I guess we should say, not passive.
Yes.
And I do find that sometimes, then your assertive types push for them to kind of continue, and you can get into like what I call a gridlock or like a fight around that as well.
So just like everything, each type has its own, is going to have its own, gifts and challenges as regards communication, and is going to have its own gifts and challenges as regards this style specifically. You can always message us if you are like a specific type and you want to know about theirs, since we can't go into all 9 right now. Um, is there anything else you want to add, Lyndsey, about nonviolent communication overall, or what people should know before they try it?
I mean, one of the things that I love is like if you actually do get his book, Nonviolent Communication, it really has really nice practical exercises that you can do at the end of the chapters to implement in your own life. And so like this is also why it's such a great tool to use sort of right away, is because you can do this without a therapist or a coach to help you. Obviously, we can help you in ways that maybe you wouldn't be able to do it well on your own, but like he does a really good job of like, here's some questions to ask yourself, here's some ways to implement that. There's workbooks, there's actually like, you can even be parts of groups that do nonviolent communication. There's a whole like thing around this. But I think that and why I've always liked this particular tool over like some of Gottman, which I love Gottman too, or some other marriage and family therapy communication skills, is like you can use this with everybody in your life. And some things like Gottman, and some of the other communications skills like emotionally focused and stuff like that, which are great tools, and I love them as well, but they are much more directed towards romantic relationships versus like this tool can be used in your romantic relationship. This tool can be used with your coworker. You could be a boss using this with an employee. You can use this with your children. It just has so many multifacets that make it such a wonderful tool.
Last thing I want to say is that once you start to see this framework, it's one of those things where you can't unsee it. So you'll start to notice that, the types of communication that are outside of this that would be considered more like violent communication are rampant and they're everywhere. And if, your friend is mad at you and she's like, well, you just don't care about me and you just don't understand me, and you're going to be like, oh wow, like that's really violent. But before you start to work with this framework, we're accustomed to people communicating that in those hurtful ways. So a positive warning, I guess, is that once you really start to incorporate into this into your life, you'll see the difference, between nonviolent communication and violent communication everywhere you look.
That happens with couples all the time. Like, Lyndsey, I need to refer some of my friends to you. And they didn't notice it before they saw me.
Exactly. Well, we're at the end already. Very Went very fast as always. So before we close, we are doing a Valentine's Day sale on our ebook from February 7th to 14th. Our ebook is $27 only. And what that book is it's a comprehensive accumulation of our knowledge and experience on Enneagram and sexuality. And it has for every type what sexuality is about for that type, the gifts and challenges for each type as regards sexuality, as well as self work principles for each type, and then also for all three instincts. So we're really happy and proud of that book. And it's going to be 27 for the whole week, 7th through the 14th, through Valentine's Day. We'll have links in our bios, and we'll also be posting it in stories. And that's a really good option for people who like us but aren't quite ready to maybe invest in like one of our workshops, which are a little bit higher price point. Buy one for your sweetie or buy one for yourself so you can treat your sweetie better if you have a sweetie, or just for your own knowledge. So look out for that because that starts tomorrow. That's it. So we'll see you back for the third episode of our relationship basics series in March.
And our third one's going to be on trust and using Brene Brown's braving acronym or model around trust, which is also another essential part of relationships. And I'm realizing, Sam, we could do so many episodes on the same thing with the sexuality as with this relationship. But I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't even get into all the things I would like to get in to teach people. But join us next month. We can't wait to talk about trust with you.
Good to see you, Lyndsey. See you in March.
Good to see you too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.